Hello, lovely people out there listening to my weekly Gene Key readings. Please get the book. I encourage you to get the book and to go on the website. There's so much nice free content out there on that website for you to get into contemplation, to find the words that draw the door to the pathway of more light, for the inner change, the genetic inner change that can happen through these ripple effects. I mean, it's just mind-blowing, don't you think? So this 13th gene key is listening through love, and really it hit me so hard because this was the first gene key that I read when I many years ago opened a book of Richard Rudd's gene keys. Back then I was still in school, and I just thought, I don't know, it was 40 euros or something, and I thought that's just too expensive for a book, and I hate school. Why should I get another book? I'm not gonna need it now. But I was very much drawn to it, and I sort of opened it, and then first my mind was a bit irritated by the 13, because back then I was still kind of conditioned to not to really think, but it's just one of these sayings, that 13 brings bad luck, and it gives a little bit of excitement to the mundane every day, until you later find out how much of the opposite actually is true. So we're in this pulse of the 13th gene key, and it's yes, I've spent a lot of time contemplating it, although I don't have it in my profile, but it's really interesting, and it's super nice for this time we are in, really. I mean, no better time than now, right? So this time I'm going to start with the gift, because I just feel that some of you, don't really take time to fast forward, and then starting with the shadow frequency can be a bit heavy, or also can trigger too much of rejection. So we're going to start with the gift now, and then move from the shadow to the Siddhi, and in that way I hope you enjoy this on this beautiful day of Lichtmess in Germany. So anyway, back to the 13th gene key. The gift is discernment. Shadow is discord, and the Siddhi is empathy. Yeah, lots of people calling themselves empaths. It's very nicely described, the slight differences between being sympathetic and being empathetic. The fellowship of man. Discernment emerges as your emotional nature comes more and more into awareness. As you realize how deeply in the thrall of desire you are, you begin to understand the whole of humanity as well. Out of this incredible swelling of awareness arises the 13th gift of discernment. Discernment begins at an individual level as you come to see how deeply your view of others is connected to your feelings. Only when personal feelings are witnessed and examined can you begin to see things in a more objective manner. Over time, your personal agendas become more lucid, and you reclaim the ability to listen to others and the world from a broader perspective. Oh, 10%. Let's see how far this goes. At this level of frequency, you become fully aware of the desires coursing through your body, and although you cannot do anything to stop them, you are no longer the victim of them. For the first time, you see your own individuality clearly, and you realize that something else exists behind that individuality. A kind of witnessing awareness that is greater than your sense of individuality. It is the birth of your ability to listen. With the rising of your discernment comes many gifts. It may appear to you as though a great veil has been drawn back from the world. As we have seen, the 13th gene key is a repository of the collective past experiences and memories of humanity. Instead of reacting out of this karmic library, you now begin to demystify your own past. What you may have thought of as a random series of experiences can be seen as following a discernible pattern. Without being caught in the drama of subjective emotional personification, you can begin to view life at a mythic level. This mythical thinking is the way in which the mind interprets your ability to listen behind the veil of your desire. To view life at a mythic level is to see the great archetypes playing out in our lives, both our personal lives and the greater collective history of man. Through understanding your own past in this way, you can see that the storylines of all individuals play out variations of the same themes. At this level, we can recognize the same archetypal themes in every culture's rituals, fairy tales, legends, and myths. Once you stop viewing life on a subjective, emotional level, a new landscape of feeling opens up inside of you. This feeling is the early manifestation of your future ability to transcend your emotional system. And it is experienced as optimism. Optimism is the gradual swelling of awareness within your solar plexus system, transferred and projected outward onto the world. One might also view it in reverse. The awareness connecting all life forms is received and drawn into your solar plexus system, thereby expanding your sense of self, to include a far wider reality, the true fellowship of man. Through your cultural heritage, whatever it happens to be, we are all embedded with the myths, stories, and archetypes that we need to eventually transcend our own emotional drama. All the world's stories, rituals, and beliefs have grown out of the very infrastructure of our DNA, which is why the same patterns emerge over and over throughout history, regardless of culture, geography, or even isolation. I don't know what that was, but okay. These collective myths and fairy tales contain the alchemical codes of evolution, including its various mutations. The stories always pass through dark periods of transition, ultimately arriving at transcendent states of consciousness. This is why discernment leads to optimism. With your gift of discernment, you don't just see the symbols, you live them in your own life, which is why they bring you so much optimism. Every character within the myth is an aspect of the whole psyche, and every circumstance they pass through is a part of our own genetic and spiritual evolution. All of this is particularly relevant today because we are passing through a mythic test as an entire species, which is perhaps the first time this has ever happened. Those with discernment know in their bellies that this phase of our history must and will lead to a transcendent leap in unconsciousness, regardless of the subjective interpretations of the fear-based culture that we live in. So let's go to the shadow part of it, okay? The chemistry of pessimism. The 13th gene key concerns a single theme, the theme of listening. Through this gene key, we will see how many dimensions there are to the art of listening and how deeply tied it is with the expansion or contraction of human consciousness. At the shadow frequency, this is the shadow of discord, which is the inability to listen to and learn from your experiences in the world. Listening is entirely different from hearing. Hearing refers to the acoustic absorption of auditory information, whereas listening is something that can only be done with your whole being. Hi. Often listening requires withdrawal and time in order for it to function effectively. Listening is also highly linked to the way in which you process your life experiences on an emotional level. The link between listening and the emotions has profound implications for the future of this gene key, and in particular its shadow frequency. Full stop. Because of the global mutation currently taking place in the solar plexus system of all human beings, our emotional chemistry is undergoing some extraordinary changes, and the 13th shadow will be affected by these changes. Along with its programming partner, the 7th shadow of division, this genetic partnership exerts an enormous influence on the direction of humanity as a species. Division. Okay. These two, powerful. These two gene keys are prime programming agent for the way in which humans interact at a group level. They actually cut far deeper than the tribal programming archetypes within our genome, which also affect our interactive capacities. The 7th and the 13th gene keys steer the one consciousness of humanity along the line of our destiny. While the 7th gene key pulls you towards the future, the 13th urges you to listen to and learn from your past. This archetypal placement within your DNA makes these two gene keys different from all others, as though they were somehow outside the scope of human influence. It is the battle waged within the frequencies of these codes that decides your future. The 13th gene key in particular is one of the most important of all the 64 gene keys, since it evolves the way in which you process your past. Discord refers to the inability to escape your own past. Stacked within the human genome lies a library, collective human experience, and your inability to process all this memory is what keeps you locked into the same self-destructive patterns. The 13th shadow shares a very important chemical connection to the 30th shadow, 13 to 30, through its link with the same genetic codon signature known as the ring of purification. The 13th shadow, the shadow of desire, is where the connection between your ability to listen is weighed against the raw force of your human desire. This codon, which codes for the amino acid known as glutamine, is one of the great human genetic battlefields. Interestingly enough, there is now a large body of scientific evidence linking this amino acid to various functions and malfunctions in our gut. Symbolically, one might draw a connection between how effectively we human beings process our past and how effectively our body eliminates waste. The force of human desire found in the 30th shadow usually outweighs our ability to listen to our past experience. And this leads us once again down roads that do not serve humanity as a whole. The problem is rooted in the human emotional system, and this 13th shadow of desire is the core of it. Because desire cannot be sated in its current form, it influences the direction of the whole human race. Despite what has happened in our past, we go on making the same poor decisions and judgments. This sets up a global frequency of discord in which we can clearly see where we have been going wrong, but are unable to remedy it at a collective level. An example of this current threat is the current threat of global warming, We can see what damage our lifestyle is doing to the long-term future of our planet, but our desire outstrips the energy to do anything about it. Anyone who has a deep knowledge of human history will see the same cycles being repeated over and over, but each time with different nuances. It is true that today there is more global awareness of the problem than ever before. However, this awareness does not change human behavior. We hear the discord that we are creating, but we do not listen to it. In the end, our emotional urge to satiate the desire within always wins. That sums up the dilemma of the 13th shadow. The ancient Chinese name for this 13th hexagram of the I Ching is the Fellowship of Men. It is a beautiful name, seemingly filled with hope, and it does not in fact describe the higher frequency of the 13th gene key. However, at the lower frequency, because of our inability to listen, we go on pursuing our own short-term agendas with disastrous consequences to the greater society. Ironically, we find no solace from our own desires either. No matter how many of our desires we sate, more appear. We hear only discord in the world because we are unable to listen to the overall dilemma. We cannot yet see it at a collective level, so we are not ready to find out what the fellowship of men really is. This is why we keep programming our future direction through the 7th shadow as a future of division, not listening to the real problem. All our actions create more and more divisions within our societies. Out of all this ancestral memory and our inability to create or find the fellowship of man, a huge pessimism emerges at an unconscious level. We no longer believe collectively that we can surmount our own nature and create a truly peaceful world. History provides compelling evidence of this. In fact, our pessimism emerges directly from our genes because, shockingly, our pessimism is in actuality correctly founded. We cannot surmount our own nature. Only nature can overcome us, which is precisely what lies in the pipeline right now. Nature is preparing a new kind of human being. Nature as a whole has learned and listened to her past experiences, and through us, she will create the giant leap that is needed to free us from a web that we have no hope of escaping. Nature will create a human in whom the art of listening will no longer have to compete with raw desire. In a single unprecedented and radical sweep, she will do this by killing off desire itself. Wow. Okay, repressive nature, permissive. These people pretend to be empathic and sympathetic to others, whilst at the same time doing nothing. The repressive side of this shadow may make a show of listening to everyone, but it soon becomes apparent that they have no real backbone. These people are permissive in the sense that they let others walk all over them without learning anything. They will agree with you no matter what you say. They mistake hearing for listening, and in doing so, they cut themselves off emotionally from others and from the environment. So one of the deepest forms of emotional repression that does not want to take in the pain or pleasure cycle at any level, so it sacrifices both extremes and settles for a false sense of safety. Boom. The reactive nature is narrow-minded. When discord manifests through a reactive being, it becomes narrow-mindedness or bigotry. And/or these people will disagree with you no matter what you say. Narrow-mindedness is about getting stuck in a reactionary emotional pattern and then making a lifestyle out of it. These people are literally unable to see beyond the limits of their own desires. Hi! And they are filled with pessimism. Their philosophy is founded upon the fear patterns that have guided all human beings to where they are now, and they are not open to the possibility of real change. Such people harbor a deep bitterness about the nature of human beings, and this comes out most frequently as anger, especially at those who do not see things their way. With such people, it often becomes their mission in life to debunk the views of those who are optimistic about the future and about humanity. So on to the Siddhi. The 13th Siddhi is empathy, the great cosmic hub. The 13th Siddhi, like its partner the 7th Siddhi, has much secret wisdom hidden within it. Our DNA is incredible. Whoa. Boys! Our DNA is an incredible. Well, it's just incredible, isn't it? Yeah. It can change. I mean, epigenetic. It's just fucking mind-blowing. Get into that shit. Get into... Love the shit out of it. Okay, here we go. An incredible substance. It contains all the memory of our entire species and even those earlier life forms from which we descended. Like a fractal shard of God itself, DNA forms the living, vibrating link to the beginning of life on this planet. Even more profoundly, it connects us to the seed from which our very universe first sprouted. It is through this 13th Siddhi that information from our collective past can be recovered. Like a kind of cosmic librarian, it has all the access codes to every volume, every written on the pages of life. We are not just talking information here, but experience. The 13th Siddhi can unlock the essence of what is to experience while a wild panther or a strawberry. The 13th Siddhi can unlock the essence of what it is to experience being a wild panther or a strawberry or a mollusk. This is the power of empathy. These days, most people use the word empathy without grasping the deeper connotations. As a fairly modern word, it is almost always confused with sympathy, a much older word joined by Aristotle. In the language of the 64 gene keys, empathy represents a Siddhic vibration and as such cannot be grasped by the mind because true empathy has nothing whatever to do with the mind. The prefix em means within, whereas the prefix sym means with. Herein lies the key to understanding the word. Whereas sympathy means to feel with another person, empathy means to be inside that person. Most people cannot conceive of being inside another person, so the term has come to be seen as metaphorical and is generally understood as being a mental or emotional projection onto or into another person. Let us reclaim then the true power of this simple word. The Siddhi of empathy requires complete dissolution of the individual self. Once identification with one's form has been cut, empathy reveals itself as the background awareness of all living forms. In other words, we really are inside each other. Whereas sympathy requires two, empathy requires one. We have seen that the foundation of this 13th gene key is based on listening. Indeed, at the level of this 13th Siddhi, listening becomes all there is. Like a black hole, this listening absorbs everything that moves into it, space, time, everything. Eventually, listening becomes so total that it fuses together subject and object, so that the concept of listening itself disappears. This gives a small hint of what the Siddhi of empathy really means. It is interesting to note how vehemently mass consciousness has always feared the number 13. In traditional folklore, 13 gained a bad name through the system of tarot, in which it stood for the death card. These ancient esoteric codes are always founded in an original truth. Empathy is indeed a death of the separate self that reveals the underlying nature of humanity. Empathy is the truest sense organ of humanity, but it cannot function through the individual, only through the collective. The 13th Siddhi and the 7th Siddhi program each other through time. The 13th, being the repository of the past, programs the future of humanity, and the 7th programs the past. This last statement may appear to make no sense, but at the civic level it is a truism. So let's repeat it. So the 13 and the 7, they program each other through time, because it's always back and forth, and depending how each are received and then transformed within into a different angle and level, this will have an effect on the future. The 13 being the repository of the past programs the future of humanity, and the 7 programs the past. All right. At the Siddhic level, the seed and the fruit exist within each other and because of each other. We think of the future being uncertain, whereas the past is in fact just as uncertain because of how it is remembered. This is the power of myth. It can take an event or series of events in time and make them immortal. To be empathic is to have access to the egg out of which all the great myths have sprung. Empathy alone goes further and deeper than myth, because it reunites the opposite and brings an end to the stories themselves. Empathy is a state of consciousness outside of time, even though it enfolds time. Again, this is symbolized by the mystery of the number 13, which stands for the hub of the great wheel of 12, the mythic number of the Grail at the center of the round table, or the Christ encircled by his 12 disciples. It is the number of Arachne, the spider, the mythical 13th sign of the zodiac. She sits at the heart of the web of creation, and through her legs she remains in constant empathy with all that is. There's huge fear to be absorbed before you attain a Siddhic state. In the case of the 13th Siddhi, this involves complete absorption in the universal discord of the 13th shadow. The human interpretation of this fear is the experience of feeling cut off from all that is alive and warm. It is an ice-cold zone in which aloneness is experienced as agony. However, through the purging of this experience, the Siddhi opens its eyes on a new world. A world in which the past has been magically transformed into a radiant new future. We might recall here that this gene key is part of the ring of purification. The human addiction to desire comes to an end in the Siddhic state of consciousness, and it is said that one spirit shall no longer return to the earth but take a birth in a higher sphere of existence. These are mythic rather than literal interpretations of what occurs to such a person. All the great esoteric interpretations, karma, rebirth, and justice, must be mythic rather than literal, since the true Siddhic state cannot be conveyed through words. In universal empathy, you enter the center of the human family and become one with all that is. Those who awaken in the truth of their consciousness through the Siddhi will become beacons that live on in our history. These people have learned the deepest art of all, the art of listening. Oh, it's still filming, I think. To sit in the presence of such a person is to be healed through being listened to.